We're talking to Chalmers Johnson. Now, Chalmers Johnson, you were a consultant for the CIA for a period through Richard Nixon, starting with Johnson, 67, right through 1973. And I'm wondering how you see its use has changed. You talk about, and you write in your book about the Central Intelligence Agency, the President's private army.
I say at one point we will never know peace until we abolish it, or at any rate restrict what it is, the monster that it's grown into. The National Security Act of 1947 lists 5 functions. It creates the Central Intelligence Agency. It lists 5 functions for it. The purpose, above all, was to prevent surprise attack, to prevent a recurrence of the attack such as the one at Pearl Harbor. Of these 5 functions, 4 are various forms of information gathering through open sources, espionage, signals intelligence, things of this sort. The 5th is simply a catch-all, that the CIA will do anything that the National Security Council, namely the foreign affairs bureaucracy in the White House, attached directly to the President, orders it to do. That's turned out to be the tail that wags the dog. And as it was made clear to the President, you have at your disposal a private army. It is totally secret. There is no form of oversight. You could order assassinations. You could order governments overthrown. You could order economies subverted that seem to get in our way. You can instruct Latin American military officers in state terrorism. You can carry out extraordinary renditions and order the torture of people, despite the fact that it is a clear violation of American law and carries the death penalty if the torture victim should die, and they commonly do in the case of renditions to places like Egypt. No president since Truman, once told that he has this power, has ever failed to use it. That became the route of rapid advancement within the CIA. Dirty tricks, clandestine activities, the carrying out of the president's orders to overthrow somebody. Starting, the first one was the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran in 1953. It's from that, the after-action report, which has only recently been declassified, that the word blowback that I used in the first of my 3 books on American foreign policy, is where the word blowback comes from. It means retaliation for clandestine activities carried out abroad, but these clandestine activities also have one other caveat on them. They were kept totally secret from the American public, so that when the retaliation does come, they're unable ever to put it in context, to see it in cause and effect terms. They use the lash out against the alleged perpetrators, usually simply inaugurating another cycle of blowback. The best example is easily 9/11/2001, which was clearly blowback for the largest clandestine operation we ever carried out, namely the recruiting, arming, and sending into battle of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union during the 1980s. But this is the way the CIA is evolved. It's been responsible for the overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile, and bringing to power probably the most odious dictator on either side in the Cold War, namely General Augusto Pinochet. Coups, one after another, in numerous Latin American countries, all under the cover of avoiding Soviet imperialism carried out by Fidel Castro, when the real purpose was to protect the interests of the United Fruit Company and continue to exploit the extremely poor and essentially defenseless people of Central America. Moreover, there is no effective oversight. There are a few, often crooked congressmen, like Randy Duke Cunningham, who are charged with oversight. When Charlie Wilson, the congressman, long-sitting congressman from the 2nd District of Texas, was named chairman of the House Intelligence Oversight Committee during the Afghan period, he wrote at once to his pals in the CIA, "The fox is in the henhouse. Gentlemen, do anything you want to."
I asked him to talk about China's role as a growing world power.
I'm optimistic about China. I think that they have shown a remarkable movement toward moderation, namely the dismantling of a Leninist economy without producing the conditions that occurred in Yeltsin's Russia. As the Hong Kong joke has it, China just had a couple of bad centuries, and it's back.
Chalmers Johnson, in January, the Chinese launched their first anti-satellite test. And I wanted to segue into that to the militarization of space.
Well, precisely. I have a chapter in Nemisis that I'm extremely proud of called The Ultimate Imperialist Project, Outer Space. It's about the Congressional Missile Lobby, the fantastic waste of funds on things that we know don't work. But they're not intended to work. They're part of military Keynesianism, of maintaining our economy through military expenditures. They provide jobs in as many different constituencies as the military-industrial complex can place them. In fact, the Chinese, the Russians, the Europeans have been asking us repeatedly for decent international measures, international treaties to prevent the weaponization of space. The Air Force has continuously used this so-called threat of our being blinded by because we have become so reliant on global positioning systems. Our so-called smart bombs depend on them. They use it to say we must arm space, we must have anti-satellite weapons in space. We have rebuffed every effort to control this.
Finally, Chalmers Johnson, you have just completed your trilogy. Your first book, Blowback, then Sorrows of Empire, and now finally Nemisis, The Last Days of the American Republic. What is your prediction?
Well, I don't see any way out of it. I think it's gone too far. I think we are domestically too dependent on the military-industrial complex. This is the insidious way in which the military-industrial complex has penetrated into our democracy and gravely weakened it, produced vested interests in what I call military Keynesianism, the use and manipulation of what is now $750 billion of the defense budget, once you include all the other things that aren't included in just the single appropriation for the Department of Defense. This is it's out of control. We depend upon it, we like it, we live off of it. I cannot imagine any president of any party putting together the coalition of forces that could begin to break into these vested interests any more than Gorbachev was able to do it in his attempted reforms of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s.
Is there anything, Chalmers, that gives you hope?
Well, that's exactly what we're doing this morning. That is the only way. You've got to reconstitute the constitutional system in America, or it is over. That is that empires, once you go in the direction of empire, you ultimately lead to overstretch, bankruptcy, coalitions of nations hostile to your imperialism. We're well on that route. The way that it might be stopped is by a mobilization of inattentive citizens. I don't know that that's going to happen. I'm extremely dubious given the nature of conglomerate control of, say, the television networks in America for the sake of advertising revenue. We see Rupert Murdoch talking about buying a third of the Los Angeles Times. But nonetheless, there is the Internet. There is Amy Goodman. There's a lot more information than there was. One of the things I have experienced in these 3 books is a much more receptive audience of alarmed Americans to Nemisis than to the previous 2 books where there was considerable skepticism. So that if we do see a renaissance of citizenship in America, then I believe we could recapture our government.